There is a chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Giza where a compass spins, where sound turns into electricity, and where, if a handful of physicists are right, time itself runs slower than it does for you standing outside. That is not a legend. That is the claim being made right now by engineers, radar specialists, and a study published in a peer-reviewed physics journal. And the strangest part is this. The ancient Egyptians described the building doing exactly that. They said the pharaoh entered the stone and came back out, having crossed millions of years. For a long time, everyone read that as poetry. Then modern instruments went inside the pyramid, and what they found does not read like poetry at all. It reads like a machine that was switched off. Most people who visit Giza never go inside. They take the photo, they ride the camel, they leave. And the ones who do go in climb up through a cramped, low granite passage, bent double, and come out into a plain rectangular room with a single broken stone box in the corner. And almost everyone feels a little cheated, because the room is bare. No treasure, no mummy, no painting, no inscription. In a civilization that covered every tomb wall it could reach in dense hieroglyphs and gods and spells, the single most important chamber in the greatest structure they ever built is silent. Blank granite. Nothing. Compare that to any other royal tomb in Egypt, walls crawling with text meant to guide the dead king. And the emptiness here becomes deafening. That silence is the first clue, and it is the one everyone walks straight past. The largest, most precisely engineered structure of the ancient world has a heart made of solid granite hauled 500 miles across a desert, and there is nothing inside it. You do not move 6,000 tons of the hardest stone in Egypt to build an empty box. You move it because the stone itself is the point. Hold on to that, because it changes everything that comes next. Here is what this video is going to walk you through. There is a specific material inside that chamber that generates electricity when you squeeze it. There is an ancient text that describes the pharaoh traveling through time in language so precise it lines up with Einstein. There is a corridor hidden in the pyramid that no human had entered for 4,500 years, confirmed by cosmic particles from space. And underneath all of it, radar scans from 2025 claim there is something enormous, a structure descending thousands of feet straight down that no archaeologist can explain. 3 clues, 1 machine, and a discovery at the bottom that was quietly sealed off. Let's start with the room they told you was a tomb. The chamber at the center of the Great Pyramid is built almost entirely from red granite quarried at Aswan, nearly 700 kilometers to the south. That granite is not ordinary rock. It is roughly 55% quartz crystal. And quartz has a property that sounds like science fiction, but sits inside every watch and every old radio you have ever owned. When you compress it, when you put it under mechanical stress, it produces an electrical charge. Scientists call it the piezoelectric effect. It is real, it is measurable, and it is the reason a quartz crystal can keep perfect time in a wristwatch. It is the reason your phone can vibrate and your microphone can turn your voice into a signal. Squeeze the crystal and electricity comes out. Now picture a room built from tons of that same crystal sitting on top of a plateau that vibrates constantly with low-frequency seismic energy from deep in the earth. The Egyptians did not choose granite because it looked nice. Limestone was cheaper, closer, and easier to cut, and it made up the entire outer body of the pyramid. The builders quarried millions of limestone blocks right there on the plateau. They could have finished the whole interior in it. Instead, for the one room at the core, they made a decision that cost them staggering effort. They went to Aswan, cut blocks of granite so hard that modern tools struggle with it, and floated them nearly the length of the country down the Nile, then dragged them up into the center of a mountain of stone. You do not do that by accident. You do that when the material itself has to be there, when only that specific stone will do the job. For decades, scholars called the choice a matter of prestige. Granite for the king, because granite was grand. But that explanation has a problem. The problem is the design of the room above the chamber. Sitting directly over that granite box are 5 separate compartments, stacked one on top of the other. Each one built from massive granite beams weighing up to 70 tons apiece. Egyptologists call them relieving chambers and say they exist to spread the weight of the pyramid so the roof of the king's chamber does not collapse. That is a reasonable engineering answer, except the top 4 of those 5 chambers are finished so roughly, so crudely, that no human was ever meant to see them. If they were only there to hold weight, fine. But an engineer named Christopher Dunn spent more than 20 years studying them, and he noticed something the tomb theory cannot explain. The chambers are not just distributing load, they are stacked, tuned, and layered in exactly the configuration you would use to make a structure resonate, to make it ring. And when he looked at the rest of the pyramid's interior with an engineer's eyes instead of an archaeologist's, the whole building stopped looking like a grave and started looking like a device. Dunn's conclusion was blunt. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb. It was a power plant. He spent more than 2 decades reverse engineering it, the way you would take apart an unfamiliar engine to work out what it did. He looked at the Grand Gallery, that soaring 28-foot-high corbelled passage, 153 feet long, rising in 7-tiered steps at a sharp incline. No other pyramid in Egypt has anything like it. Egyptologists call it a ramp, or a storage space for blocking stones. Dunn saw the mounting slots cut into its walls and argued it was built to hold an array of resonators, tuned to catch the constant microvibration of the earth and turn it into acoustic energy. He argued that energy was focused, channeled up the gallery, and driven into the king's chamber, where the quartz-rich granite would convert it through the piezoelectric effect into a coherent beam of microwave energy. He pointed to the queen's chamber, with its strange shafts and salt-crusted walls, as the place where a chemical reaction produced hydrogen to feed the system. And he pointed to the granite box in the king's chamber itself, its corner broken, and, in his reading, showing signs of having been exposed to extreme heat, not simply chipped. Mainstream archaeology dismissed all of it. They said Dunn was an aerospace machinist, not an Egyptologist, that he was seeing machines everywhere because machines were the only language he spoke. They said the salt was natural, the heat marks were imagination, the resonator slots were just construction features. And they had a fair point. There is no direct evidence, not one recorded measurement, that the pyramid ever produced a single watt of power. A theory that explains everything and predicts nothing is not science. But before you file this under fantasy, you need to know what happened when a group of physicists stopped arguing about ancient intentions altogether and simply asked a physics question. What does this specific shape actually do to energy that passes through it? If you want the real evidence, and not just the theory, subscribe now, because the next part is where a mainstream science journal walked straight into the middle of the conspiracy without meaning to. In 2018, a team of researchers from ITMO University in Russia and a laser institute in Germany published a study in the Journal of Applied Physics. This was not a fringe blog. This was peer-reviewed physics. They wanted to know how the Great Pyramid interacts with electromagnetic waves, specifically radio waves. So they built a precise model of the structure and ran the simulation. And the result stopped people cold. Under the right conditions, at radio wavelengths between 200 and 600 meters, the pyramid does not scatter that energy randomly. It focuses it. It concentrates electromagnetic energy in exactly 2 places: the internal chambers, including the king's chamber, and a region directly beneath the base of the pyramid. The building acts like a lens, a resonator. It gathers ambient energy out of the air and funnels it to specific points inside the stone, and to a spot hidden underneath it. The scientists were not trying to prove any ancient astronaut theory. They were physicists modeling a shape, and they openly said their real interest was designing tiny, pyramid-shaped nanoparticles that could focus light for better solar cells and sensors. They had no stake in Egypt at all, but their own model, run with the standard mathematics of electromagnetic scattering, showed that this 4,500-year-old structure behaves like a giant resonator, a lens for radio energy. And the focal points it identified were the internal chambers and a spot directly beneath the base, the same location where the pyramid's own unfinished subterranean chamber was carved into the bedrock. The building gathers energy and drops it in exactly the places the Egyptians hollowed out. Not similar, not close. The exact spots. That is clue number one, and it is the most concrete thing we have, because it is not a theory about what the builders wanted. It is a measurement of what the building does. The pyramid concentrates energy. The Egyptians built its heart out of the one crystal that turns energy into electricity, and they carved a hidden room into the ground, exactly where the physics says the energy pools. Now here is where it stops being about power and starts being about something people have whispered about for over a century. Because the idea that the Great Pyramid is a time machine is not new, and it did not start with the internet. In the 1800s, a group of mathematicians and astronomers, including the British Astronomer Royal for Scotland, became convinced the pyramid's measurements encoded a prophetic timeline, a map of history and the future written in stone. They called it the prophecy of the Great Pyramid. Serious men, respected scientists of their day, spent years measuring passages and converting inches into years, convinced the building was a calendar of time itself. Modern Egyptology threw all of it out, but the instinct behind it, that this structure has something to do with time, keeps coming back, and in the last few decades, it stopped being about prophecy and started being about physics. There is an ancient Egyptian phrase that appears again and again in the temple and tomb texts. It talks about the pharaoh living for millions of years. Standard translation treats it as flattery. Kings were always described as eternal, godlike, everlasting. Millions of years just meant forever. For decades, that was the accepted reading, symbolic praise for a dead king. But look closer at how the texts describe the process. The pharaoh does not simply die and become eternal. The pharaoh enters a structure, undergoes a transformation inside it, and emerges having crossed an immense span of time, while the world outside moved differently. The texts describe the king going into the horizon, into the stone, and coming back changed, aligned with the eternal. Read once. It is a metaphor for the afterlife. Read again. With modern physics in your head, it describes something else entirely. It describes time dilation. Here is the part that makes physicists uncomfortable, because it is not mysticism, it is Einstein. According to general relativity, mass warps time. The more concentrated the mass, the slower time flows near it. This is not a theory anymore. We have measured it in a laboratory with clocks placed just a foot apart at different heights. We have measured it with atomic clocks flown on aircraft. Clocks on GPS satellites tick at a measurably different rate than clocks on the ground. And every navigation device on Earth has to correct for that difference, or your maps would drift miles off within a day. Time genuinely, physically, runs slower near large concentrations of mass. This is the most tested idea in modern physics, and it wins every single time. Now consider the Great Pyramid. It is one of the most massive objects ever assembled by human hands, roughly 6 million tons of stone piled onto a single footprint on the Earth's surface. Some physicists and science writers have run the thought experiment out loud. Put a person in the chamber at the dense center of that mass, and by the equations of relativity, they age very slightly slower than the people standing outside in the open air. The effect from ordinary stone is unimaginably tiny, far too small to feel. But the direction of the effect is not zero. It is real. Which means, in the strictest, most literal sense that physics allows, A massive structure with a sealed chamber at its center is a time machine. A weak one, but a real one. The only thing separating a weak one from a strong one is how much mass and how much energy you can concentrate on that single point. And now recall what we have already established: a chamber of energy focusing crystal, a geometry proven to concentrate electromagnetic energy on that exact chamber. A hidden room carved directly beneath the base, where the physics says the fields also pool: mass to bend time, crystal and geometry to gather the energy that could, in principle, bend it far more. The Egyptians built the most massive, time-bending object on the planet, tuned its heart with quartz, and put a single empty, sealed room at the focal point. Then they wrote that the king went inside and crossed millions of years. We called it poetry. Relativity calls it geometry. That explanation still has a problem, though, and it is the biggest one. A pile of stone, no matter how massive, only bends time by a fraction of a second. To do anything more, you would need energy, enormous, concentrated, focused energy. Which brings us back to the crystal chamber, the resonating granite, and the 2018 study showing the pyramid gathers electromagnetic energy and focuses it on the exact chamber where a person would sit. Mass to bend time, crystal to generate power, a geometry that concentrates energy on the focal point. 3 separate features, all pointing at the same room, all discovered by different people who were not looking for the same answer. And that is when the investigation stopped being about theory, because in 2017, something physically real was found inside the pyramid that nobody had ever seen. And they found it using particles that fall from space. Cosmic rays constantly rain down on the Earth from exploding stars and events across the galaxy. When they hit the upper atmosphere, they produce muons, heavy subatomic cousins of the electron that pass through solid rock but get absorbed at different rates depending on how much stone is in the way. Point a muon detector at a mountain or a pyramid, and empty spaces show up as places where more particles get through than the solid stone around them would allow. It is like an X-ray of a mountain, except the light source is the universe itself, and the exposure takes months. The technique is trusted enough that scientists use it to look inside active volcanoes and even nuclear reactors. A team called Scan Pyramids, an international mission launched in 2015, placed these detectors inside the Queen's chamber and around the base of the Great Pyramid, using several independent detector types built by different universities, so no single instrument could fool them. In November 2017, they published their result in the journal Nature, one of the most respected scientific publications on Earth. Above the Grand Gallery, sealed inside solid stone, with no known entrance, there was a void, a cavity at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section comparable to the Grand Gallery itself, a space the length of a passenger aircraft, hidden in the heart of the pyramid that no one had known about for 4,500 years. They confirmed it 3 separate ways, with 3 different detector technologies, before they dared to publish. Not a crack, not a gap between blocks. A deliberate, enormous, sealed space that appears on no plan, matches no known chamber, and has no agreed-upon purpose to this day. The first major structure found inside the Great Pyramid since the 19th century, and we found it with particles from deep space. Then in 2023, using the same cosmic particle method and confirming it with ground-penetrating radar and ultrasound, before they went public, the team published a second finding in Nature Communications. Behind the great chevron stones, on the pyramid's north face, the stones set in an arrow shape above the original entrance, they had found a corridor, about 9 meters long, roughly 2 meters by 2 meters in cross-section. Sealed, hidden, and again, with no known entrance and no agreed function. They named it the North Face Corridor. When they finally threaded a tiny camera through a joint in the stones, they saw it for the first time. A smooth, empty passage that no eye had looked into since the pyramid was built. Some researchers think it relieves the weight above the entrance. Others think it points to something still concealed behind it, a room of extreme value the builders wanted hidden. No one knows. Think about what that means. 4,500 years of visitors, tomb robbers, treasure hunters, archaeologists, and entire armies crawling over this structure. Napoleon's scholars measured it. The Victorians tunneled into it. And in just the last few years, using particles from space, we discovered it is riddled with hidden spaces we never knew existed. A void the size of an airliner. A sealed corridor behind the entrance. The most studied building in human history. And we are still finding rooms in it. The pyramid we thought we had completely mapped is, in truth, mostly unexplored. It was sealed, it was mapped, it was declared understood. And it quietly kept its rooms secret until light from dying stars gave them away, and the deeper they scanned, the stranger it got. Because the biggest anomaly of all was not inside the pyramid at all. It was underneath it. In March 2025, a team led by researchers Corrado Malenga, Filippo Biondi, and Armando May announced something that, if it holds up, dwarfs everything else. Using a technique built on synthetic aperture radar, combined with a Doppler analysis of tiny vibrations, they claimed to have imaged deep below the Giza plateau, far beneath the pyramids themselves, without turning a single shovel of earth. And what they described does not sound like geology. They reported a network of structures descending straight down beneath the Khafre pyramid. 8 enormous vertical wells or shafts, hollow, wrapped in descending spiral pathways, arranged in 2 parallel rows and plunging hundreds of meters into the bedrock. At the bottom, they claimed, the shafts merged into 2 massive cube-shaped chambers, and above ground zero, sitting over the known burial chamber, they described 5 strange stacked structures they nicknamed for their shape, each with multiple horizontal levels. They said the whole grid extended roughly 2 kilometers underground, and that it ran beneath all 3 of the main Giza pyramids as a single connected system. 8 vertical wells, spiral descents, cube-shaped chambers at the base of each, stacked structures directly above the tomb. This was not the language of graves and burial goods. This was the language of infrastructure, of machinery on a scale that would make the pyramids on the surface look like nothing more than the visible tip of something enormous buried underneath. And it was not the only recent scan to find a void the authorities had no explanation for. In 2025, a separate team working the Scan Pyramids project on the third pyramid, Menkaure, used radar, ultrasound, and electrical resistivity to peer behind a strangely polished patch of granite on its eastern face. They found 2 hidden air-filled cavities, sealed spaces that behave nothing like the limestone around them, and they still cannot say what they are for. Everywhere the new instruments look, they find rooms that should not be empty and voids that no one designed a tomb to have. Now, does this prove the pyramids were an ancient time machine built by a lost civilization? No. And this is the part where honesty matters more than hype. The 2025 radar claims are hotly disputed. Many mainstream archaeologists say the technique cannot possibly resolve structures that deep from satellite data. That what the team found could be data artifacts rather than real chambers, and that no independent group has confirmed it. The Egyptian authorities have not endorsed it. Christopher Dunn's power plant, for all its elegance, has never produced a shred of physical evidence that the pyramid generated electricity. And the 2018 physics study only showed the building can concentrate radio energy, not that anyone ever used it to. The relativity angle is real physics, but the actual time-slowing effect of a stone pyramid is so small it is effectively meaningless for a human being. Every extraordinary piece of this story has a grounded, skeptical answer, and the honest position is that none of it, on its own, proves the machine. But here is what the skeptics cannot wave away, and it is more unsettling than the wildest theory. Even stripped down to only the confirmed, published, peer-reviewed facts, the Great Pyramid is not what we were taught. Its central chamber really is built from quartz-rich granite, hauled hundreds of miles for no structural reason. That granite really does generate electricity under stress. The plateau really does vibrate. A real physics journal really did find that the structure focuses electromagnetic energy into its chambers and into a spot beneath its base. Cosmic ray scans really did reveal a plane-sized void and a hidden corridor that no one knew were there. The builders achieved stone-cutting tolerances that we struggle to reproduce today. Take away every conspiracy, every alien, every lost Atlantis, and you are still left with a 4,500-year-old structure that behaves like an engineered instrument and that we do not understand. The truth is not that the pyramid is definitely a machine. The truth is that we built the story of a simple tomb around a building whose actual measured properties look nothing like a tomb. And that gap between what we were told and what the instruments keep finding is the real mystery. If even part of this is right, it means the people who cut and placed those stones understood materials, resonance, and geometry at a level we assumed was impossible for the ancient world. It means the phrase, millions of years, might not have been flattery, but a description. It means the emptiness of that chamber is not the absence of treasure, but the absence of a mechanism, something that was there and is gone, or something that was never switched on. And it means the most studied structure on Earth is still hiding rooms, still hiding shafts, still hiding whatever sits at the bottom of those 8 spiral wells in the radar scans that no one has been allowed to dig. Because that is where it ends, for now. The radar shows something beneath the plateau. The permits to confirm it have not come. The corridors found by cosmic particles remain sealed, explored only by small robots pushed through cracks. The chamber at the center sits empty, its granite still faintly humming with the vibration of the earth, waiting for an energy that may never come again. The Egyptians said the pharaoh entered the stone and crossed millions of years. We built a tomb around that sentence to make it comfortable. But the stone is still there, still precise, still concentrating energy exactly where they told us the king would sit. And whatever is buried 2 kilometers beneath it is still down there in the dark, mapped by radar, untouched by hands, waiting for someone with the courage to open it. If this pulled you in, the next investigation on screen goes even deeper. Watch it now.